Welcome, everyone. We still have, I see 2 empty seats over here on the right, if someone would like to grab one. We're going to get the program started now. We've got, obviously, a packed house and a full agenda and a lot of conversation. So welcome again. My name's Peter Scosi. I'm Executive Vice President here at Metropolitan Planning Council. Want to welcome you to this afternoon's roundtable on the CMAP Go-To 2040 Plan update. Before we get the program officially started, I want to introduce our board member, Tyler Anthony with ComEd, our sponsor for today's event. And Tyler's going to share a few words.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Welcome, everyone. As Peter said, my name's Tyler Anthony. I'm a Senior Vice President for Commonwealth Edison. My position is Senior VP of Distribution Operations. I'm pretty much responsible for the daily operations of ComEd's electric system. And ComEd's very, very proud to be the sponsor of today's event. We support both MPC and we support CMAP. And we believe that their focus in regional planning is noteworthy, and we should have a very good discussion today. I did review CMAP's plan update, and I'll share with everybody. I thought 3 main themes came out of the update today. Competitiveness, livability, and sustainability. I think if you take the time to go through their plans, they were the 3 main themes. And, you know, I deal a lot with Mary Sue, and I deal a lot with Peter, and the passion that they have around these topics permeates through their entire organization. And I think today's showing and the interest level in regional planning, it's just impressive as we're all down here enjoying a beautiful day here in downtown Chicago. But as far as regional planning, I would share with you this. You know, whether it's planning, maintaining, or modernizing infrastructure, the reason I'm on the board at MPC is because it ties strongly with the priorities of ComEd. Whether it's our energy efficiency, our infrastructure reliability improvements, or improvements around storm hardening, or now, as we're embarked on our smart grid install around leveraging data to help the people that live in our regions and areas enjoy a more sustainable and better life. So once again, thank you all for coming, making this a very important event. We have a very esteemed panel today. I hope you enjoy it. Let me turn it back over to Peter.
Thank you, Tyler. So we do have a standing room only crowd. I'd like to think it's because everybody secretly longs to be a planner. Thank you for laughing at that. But probably they're here because this is an important topic. It really does, the Go-To 2040 plan itself and this update we're talking about today really does set forth the agenda for growth in the region. And it's critical that we are all behind that, understand that, and work to make this update an important update and one that really helps to improve the plan and the recommendations therein. MPC has been a strong supporter of CMAP since its creation. We sit on a couple of the committees at CMAP, participate very closely with the local technical assistance program, partner with CMAP over the last 3 years on that program. I serve on the Transportation Committee and enjoy greatly the monthly discussions that we have there around CMAC allocations and Transportation Improvement Plan updates, stuff that's a little mundane and in the weeds, but really critical to the discussions that move, the decisions that move this region forward. We have a terrific panel today, folks that are themselves leaders in their industry, but also know quite well the work that CMAP does. We're joined by Leanne Redden, the Acting Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Authority, who has also been engaged with CMAP since the creation, and Mayor Tom Weisner from Aurora, who has been worn several hats, no joke intended, in relation to CMAP and regional planning efforts. We're also scheduled to be joined by President Toni Preckwinkle today. Many of you might know that Cook County is, and the President herself, are very actively trying to pass pension reform in Springfield. Their effort passed the Senate a couple days ago. She is actively in Springfield today trying to pass that through the House. So her physical presence is not with us today. I know she's here in spirit. And we're hoping that Herman Brewer will be joining us shortly to speak on the county's behalf as well. The program today is one thing you might notice. There's no screen, therefore no PowerPoints. So, yay. And so this will be a discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Randy in a moment. Randy is going to provide some brief overview. I'm sorry, Randy Blankenhorn, the Executive Director of CMAP. I did fail to mention that he's also on the panel. Randy is going to provide an update of the GoTo24, or an overview of the update, and then engage the panelists in a discussion around that. We're going to listen to that for a little while, but then we are going to turn to you in the audience to field your questions. So please think about those and have them at the ready. At the appropriate time, we'll be passing a microphone around and taking those. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Randy, and we'll get started.
Well, thanks, Peter. And welcome, Herman. Peter told me that I have about 7 minutes to talk, and I can't hardly say Blankenhorn in 7 minutes. But I will try to do a real brief of what this update's about, where we are, and what we're doing. And I want to start by talking about GoTo 2040 itself. And many of you have heard me say this before often, but I'll say it again because it's so important. GoTo 2040 is really only about two things. It's about the economic prosperity of this region, and it's about the strength of our communities. That's what it's about. Everything we do drives towards those goals, and we believe you can't have one without the other. Without a strong economy, your communities can't be strong, and business isn't going to come where communities aren't working. And so we have to work together to make those things happen, and at the end, that's what GoTo 2040 is all about. We passed this 4 years ago, almost now. It seems like some days shorter, some days forever ago. But we have this rule, this federal law, that we have to update this every 4 years, which seems sometimes like we're in constant plan mode. But we have spent the last 3.5 years really trying to implement what's here and working with our partners to make that happen. And I just want to talk about that for a few seconds. I also would be remiss if I didn't say that the plan itself has been incredibly well received, not only regionally but nationally. But I think we're maybe the most proud of the fact that we won the Burnham Award here at MPC. That was a big thing for us, a big deal. It really meant that all of you care about what this plan says, care about how it implements the goals and hopes of this region, and so we're very appreciative to MPC for that. So we look at this update not just as a regulatory thing that we have to do, but we really look at it as an opportunity to step back and say, over the last 4 years, what's changed? Demographically, what's changed? Financially, what's changed? How has development changed over the last 4 years? And honestly, we've had a lot of change between 2010 and 2014. But we also look at it as a chance to say we have this hard strategy for how we implement the plan. What's going well? What isn't? Why isn't it if it's not? Where do we need to change either the methods? Do we need to change the strategy itself? How do we need to get to these goals that we've set for ourselves in the plan? And that's really where we've focused our update work. The policy tenets of the plan haven't changed. The major issues that we cared about in 2010 are still the issues we care about today, but we started to tweak some of those as we look at this plan update. This is a preview of what's going to be in that update a little bit. Our board and the MPO Policy Committee will release it for public comment at their June meetings. It'll be out for public review over the summer and hopefully get endorsement of those same committees in the fall. So that's kind of the schedule. Very briefly, start with transportation. What's changed? The biggest thing that's changed is we don't have as much money. And I think that's a pretty understandable to everybody. We always knew that, as my staff shudders when I say the days of money raining down on us from Springfield and Washington are over, but they are. And while there will always be a significant role for state government and federal government in our transportation system, we've got to start to think about how we invest in ourselves. How do we invest resources regionally to solve the problems that we have regionally? And I know our panelists are constantly thinking about how we do that. And it's not just as easy as flipping that switch. We have to be serious about things like congestion pricing. We have to be serious about things like, how do we make better decisions with the limited funds we have? How do we put performance-based funding, what we call that new performance-based decision-making, into hard practice so that we're using the money in the best way that we can? The second part of this is the livable communities section, and the biggest story here has been the local technical assistance program. For those of you that don't know, the day after the plan was adopted, we got a call that we were going to get some money from HUD to start to implement that plan. And I joke about it because in my remarks that day I said, the real work starts tomorrow. I didn't know it was literally tomorrow. But it was, and we've been able to work with well over 100 communities to date. 60 projects are completed, another 40 or 50 are underway, on helping them think about the problems that they have in their communities and how they relate to this regional structure and this regional situation that they're in. It's not us telling them their problems, it's us helping them think through them. And we've really been successful in working together with local governments to make that happen. The news is, how do we shift that? We're a planning agency, so we're always going to do plans, but how do we shift the focus away from so many new plans into implementing the plans that we have? And I think that's what this update is going to talk about, is where do we take these next steps? We've done some really good planning at the local level. Communities have done really good planning on their own. How do we make these plans come together? The Chicago Community Trust had an on-the-table event, I think that many of you were involved in. We had one of ours in a south suburban community who has a plethora of plans. And we said, let's start to focus. Let's start to think about how we move these things along, and let's not reach for the next shiny object that comes along. And that's really been our message. The third piece is human capital. Mayor Weisner and I were talking about this briefly right before our session. We're still very concerned that we're training for yesterday's jobs. I spend a lot of time talking to manufacturing owners who tell me over and over and over again, I have jobs that I can't fill. I have good paying jobs that I can't fill. I have jobs where people can raise a family on, and I can't fill them. And when we have 9% unemployment rate in this region, that's a sin. That's a shame, and we've got to figure out how to connect those much, much better. How do we fill this jobs gap that we have? How do we make our workforce investment boards work better? How do we make sure the training programs that we have are focused on the needs of business and on the needs of jobs? And mainly, how do we get business more engaged in that conversation? I think that's where we're going to be focused a lot in this update. Finally, it's about efficient governance. And we can talk about a lot of things, but I guess I'll focus on one for the 1 minute that I have left. And that's say that we have a 1960s tax code in a 21st century economy. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for business. It doesn't work for government. It doesn't work for taxpayers. And we've got to think about serious reform of this system. And there are a lot of ideas out there. I'll just mention one that I know MPC is very engaged in, and that is we tax the least amount of services in the country. When we put this tax code together, it might have made some sense because we were pretty much a goods economy. We are not a goods economy anymore. We are very much a service economy, and we've got to figure that out. We think that we can do something on the service side and lower the rate on goods so that it's more equitable across the board, but still do something that raises revenue for the state government, for local governments, and makes business work better here. So to wrap this up before we get into the Q&A section of this, Go to 2040 was designed as a blueprint, but it was designed that others would implement it. We used to laugh all the time that we have a whole lot of recommendations for others in the plan because CMAP doesn't implement all that much on its own. The next 4 years are really going to be key to, are we going to be serious about taking the steps necessary to move this region along? Are we going to hope that business as usual will get us through whatever we've got to get through? We don't think that's the case. We think it's important that we be innovative, that we think about our region differently, that we're proactive in making the kinds of decisions that we need to make growth happen well, to make our economy work, and to make our communities strong. So that's the brief overview of where we are and what we're doing with the update. But now we get to have more of a conversation, and we're just going to throw these issues out and talk back and forth, and someone is going to give me the high sign when it says cut it off, and we'll go into the audience. But let's start with transportation, since Leanne's on my left. And this whole group is very much engaged in that. They didn't say that Mayor Weisner is on the tollway board as well as my board. Herman is actively involved in much of the transportation activity that's going along in the county. So we talk about transportation as a necessary investment in the economy of this region, that transportation in so many ways is the reason we exist. It is our global economic advantage, and that if we don't invest in it, we lose jobs. It's just that simple. But it's also not that easy. You know, we spin our wheels, so to speak, in figuring out how to make sustainable revenue work. How do we think about this? And so, Leanne and all of our panelists, why is it important from your perspective, And what do we have to do to get some momentum about sustainable revenues for transportation? Easy question to start with.
If I had the answer, I probably wouldn't have this. I wouldn't need this job. But I mean, that is sort of the conundrum, the biggest challenge we all face. I think you're right. This region exists because of the transportation sort of nexus that we have, and we're blessed to have the infrastructure that we have. Unfortunately, we haven't been making the investments into that infrastructure to sustain it and support it. And it really is sort of, if we think of the region as a human body, the transportation network is kind of the blood that keeps everything pumping. When we talk about the economic engine and jobs, but fundamentally it's the transportation system that connects that. I mean, obviously I just really wear the transit hat right now, but I've played on the highway side and I've played on the municipal side as well, so I think I bring a slightly broader perspective. But it is really challenging. It is true that Springfield and the federal government are not raining money down upon us. So we have to start looking to ourselves. We have to start looking creatively, and I tend to say we need to be continuing to look under every rock. The plan, Go to 2040 plan talks about, congestion pricing, and that's one sort of tool in the toolbox. But that's not necessarily, that might be able to sort of impact behavior and maybe generate some revenues, but it's not sort of a silver bullet. On the transit side of things, we're proactively, again, trying to find as much money as we can. Some of the things that we've been doing is actually working on the national level to build support for additional funding from the federal government. They're not raining money down on us, but they still have a responsibility to invest in the infrastructure. And we shouldn't let that ride. So we're actually investing a lot of time and effort in leading that debate and that fight, not just locally, but nationally, and have built a coalition across the country focused very much on investing in state of good repair. Working with our transit partners and others like-minded or sort of similarly interested and invested groups to help support that. I think the business community is missing from some of that conversation, and if someone can help me find out how we can really engage that group to, I find, and I've done too many pilgrimages to Washington, sort of asking for money, and to some extent it seems self-serving. It's like, give us money, we need it for our infrastructure, and, the congressional leaders and staff are often like, well, where's the business community? People say this is about access to jobs. You're saying it's about access to jobs. Where are they in the conversation? I think that's a really key piece. But on the other fronts of looking for money and sort of finding money, one of the other things that we're proactively and just we have a fiduciary responsibility to collect all the monies that we've got due to us. And so one of the things we have taken on is a fight on the sales tax issue of companies that are using sort of a creative tax planning strategies, let's call them that, and locating outside of our region in a way where they collect their sales. Even though they have bricks and mortar, they're using the infrastructure in our region, and this is not just a transit issue, this is a roadway issue, this is a local municipal issue. People that are using our infrastructure in all varieties, and services to get to and from work to support the businesses and industries they have. We are actually taking on that fight. It's a challenging fight. It's a very nuanced issue, but to make sure that we collect all the revenues that are meant to be paid into this region to support the infrastructure we have. So there's some of the practical things that we're doing, and with that I'll let others talk a little bit more.
Let me just, before we go to Tom, I think that you raised a key point about the business community, and it's amazing to me when we go to Washington as well. There's one issue that business and labor agree on, and that's raising revenues for transportation, and yet we still can't seem to get that done. So, there's something there that we are all missing, and we've got to find it. Mayor?
Thank you. There we go. I just want to say I'm very happy to be here today for several reasons, not the least of which is that as a panelist I get to sit down. But I'm going to go right from the conversation here and talk about the business community. When the federal highway system under Eisenhower was created, that really is the source of much of the economic success this nation had over 40, 50-year span. And I don't get, at this point, Eisenhower is a prominent Republican, I don't want to go to politics, I just want to go, that one would think that this does get wrapped up in politics, unfortunately, in Washington. But as the Republican Party likes to think of itself as the party of business, I don't quite understand why. Because we're in this together, and unless we make the investments in our infrastructure together, all the success we had for the last half century, we are rapidly becoming, if you look at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that includes the U.S., but a lot of European nations did I think Chicago area was the first one in the barrel in terms of a full study. And they saw that the economy here in the Chicago, Milwaukee, Gary region was really stagnant for an entire first decade of this century. And part of the reason, there's a number of reasons, workforce development we'll talk about, but one of the reasons a prominent one was transportation. And so we've got to get past that whole idea. If we want to be competitive in a world economy, we do have to get the business community activated on this, no matter what party they're in. As a mayor, it doesn't matter. Parties don't matter. Progress is what matters. I would put on my tollway hat a little bit here to say that, in our Move Illinois program, I think it's a $21 billion program, that's a partial answer to some of the needs here. And thank God, the tollway is kind of on a user fee system. I was on the board when we raised tolls. As a mayor, that's not something I enjoyed greatly, but understanding the needs of the area, that is something that we've had to do. That's made it possible now to engage in some great upgrades on I-90 to widen and improve that. And in that program, we are, because of the Elgin O'Hare access that we're also working on, that project, then the support or the likelihood that demand would be sufficient right off the bat for congestion pricing doesn't seem to be there. However, in all of what we do, we are putting the infrastructure in there to be able to move to that quickly. We're working very much, for the first time, introducing transit to our system, widening the shoulder lanes, et cetera, allowing ourselves to do bus on shoulder, and ultimately to do a bus lane only as the need comes. So we're trying to be forward-looking in that regard. The user fee system works well in some situations. It doesn't work everywhere. So we've got to figure out other ways. Congestion pricing is one of those, but we've got to figure out some other ways to raise revenues.
Yeah, I think when I said that the plan was about recommendations for others, the tollway was really the first one out of the box to take some of these recommendations and put the Move Illinois program together. Most of our major capital projects in that original plan are now underway because of this program. So,
and I want to say Go to 2040 was, a major instrument to guide us towards what projects to prioritize, and that's where we've gone. I think thankfully we have the ability to make some progress, but in the other areas, IDOT, federal funding, those types of things, we still have some problems.
Randy, I'll just be brief, and I'll just make a very practical response to your question about how do you get business involved. We're living in an economy and a marketplace where people talk about smart. We have smart phones, we have smart cars, we have smart this, and businesses are really, in order to engage them in the transportation discussion, they have to be positioned to make smart decisions. They know that the young, smart hotshots coming out of our universities that they want to attract and retain, they don't want to sit in traffic all day to and from work. They want convenience. They're very impatient, and those employers are impatient. And so they have to become engaged in the transit and transportation, highways, rapid rail kinds of discussions from that perspective. They can't view it as solely the purview of public policy makers. They can drive it. And it should be a market response.
No, that's a great point. To move on to the livability question, we're doing the local technical assistance program. We actually, right out of the box after the plan, partnered with the RTA and their community planning program so that we made it one application. Communities we could figure out how to best serve them between the two agencies, tried to make it seamless. For the mayor, we've done a lot of work in local governments, and for Herman, we are continuing to work with Cook County on a lot of different projects. But let's get beyond. My question from the plan is, how do we get beyond the plan and into implementation of this? What are the next steps that we really need to look at? And then, for my advice, how does CMAP play that role? How can we help?
From the sort of micro perspective of just the transit piece of things, we actually moved in 2010 away from just this planning concept into this implementation. It was great to have, several hundred plans on the shelf, but what if nothing ever comes from them? They're good exercises and planners love to plan. But I challenged everybody, let's move beyond that. Let's think about how do we, and so the first question I sort of posed to the group was sort of but for, how come this plan hasn't moved ahead? And obviously sort of we sit in a little bit of the same spaces as CMAP in the sense that we don't have jurisdiction necessarily to do some of the things that even the plans are. I can't tell. We can create land use plans with a local municipality around TOD, transit-oriented development, and things like that. But what's the missing link? And we sort of went through every one of our plans, reconnected with every municipality that we had done a plan or a town or county with, and said, what's the missing, what's your next step? What do you need? And was that a role that we could play? Could we support financially, technically, and facilitate some of that? So we then developed that list and then actually have gone back and actually moved our program more to an implementation effort. And we continue to do that on an annual basis. Just last year, we invested just $2 million just on relatively small capital improvements in and around towns that had existing train stations, for example. So pedestrian access, simple things like, we just needed a pedestrian head connected to that signal. We funded that investment. Some of these small micro investments actually start to make a difference. And it's sort of just changing that philosophy as opposed to don't put just this pretty picture, sketch plan and a book that goes on a shelf. CMAP, and one of the great things that I think has grown out of the continuing partnership with CMAP is we have coordinated these programs and we do one call for projects, but we then sit down collectively and go, you're better off with that one because that's more of a land use and water resources thing. This one's just transit. We're going to take that one because we've got that expertise. So we're not tripping over each other. We're not overlapping. We're not duplicating. We're actually leveraging all our resources off each other in a much better way. And then in many cases too, maximizing the small amounts of investments that we locally have within our existing budgets to leverage state and federal monies to get much more bang for that buck. I could give examples of some of the projects we've worked on, but that's sort of in a nutshell that focus. And so it's sort of asking that but-for question, I think, and then reconnecting with the people you've done a plan with and sort of chipping away at. This isn't rocket science. This is, is it just a zoning code update? Is it an overlay district that needs to be created? Or do we need to create these small capital investment programs, which is something I know you're talking about taking to that next level in a potential future budget for CMAP if revenue can be generated?
Sure. Well, Randy, again, CMAP has really helped us, and the plan itself has helped us with our talking and our doing. We're very fortunate in some respects that President Preckwinkle has compelled my Bureau of Economic Development, to work strongly and closely in collaboration with the Superintendent of Highways and Transportation, John Yonan, who's here. And that team, we've really been fortunate because they have essentially collaborated with my staff to really put together examples that make the case for the plans. So we're not just planning. And obviously with CMAP's technical assistance, we're moving forward with planning for progress, which is going to, among other things, spell out the priorities for our community block grant expenditures. But we're working with that team to really, again, make the case. We've got examples of projects that have been undertaken in Harvey, where there's a $10 million rebuild of Center Street, an extraordinarily important project that's going to facilitate industrial development and retention in that area. In Phoenix, we worked, again, John Yona and Maria Choka Urban, my team worked with a business there, and there is essentially a rebuilding of a street that is compelling that company to stay in place. 120 jobs staying here, not going to Indiana. So again, those are examples of making the case for the plans and the implementation of those plans, and it's largely been guided beginning from the CMAP work, building into the plans that we're doing, again, planning for progress. We're now having our transportation, our first formal long-range transportation plan in 70 years, again, thanks to John's team and Maria and others, connecting Cook County, our first plan in 70 years. Well, again, big part of that is ensuring our transportation investments are made in the right way. And the examples I've given you are, in fact, areas where we've leveraged resources. We're leveraging motor fuel tax. We're leveraging our block grant funds. We're doing a number of things here so that we don't have standalone projects, projects that exist in isolation, and projects that don't really address a whole host of things across the region. So.
Yeah, I think I probably, as a mayor, prior to becoming mayor, I was a city employee, watched any number of plans get developed, watched everybody applaud, and watched them sit on a shelf forever after that. And so I have my outlook is perhaps what we need to be doing a little bit more of, and I hate to be brutally cold and hard on this matter, but the reality is maybe we ought to be making sure that there's a willingness to go from the planning to implementation before we give a planning grant. Because what we're doing, in Aurora is basically following through, and that's all we're doing. And it works like a charm, believe me. And so we have, we've probably procured $13 million in CMAP grants to support a citywide computerized traffic management system because we put in a fiber network several years ago that supports that. And so we're ideally positioned to take advantage of those grants. And so we've received those grants. We've got green infrastructure grants to a great number because we're installing green infrastructure rain gardens instead of redoing gray infrastructure for sewer separation. And so this year we'll be planning, 96 rain gardens at 28 intersections throughout the community. And we get the dollars because we're doing it. We're doing what we said we would do. And so I think to some extent what needs to be done here is it's not a matter of ability. The city of Aurora has a median income much lower than any of its neighbors. So it's not about money. We're not a Naperville. We're not a Barrington Hills. I think it's more about will than it is money in some cases. And I think that there should be some indication, a clear indication that that community intends to follow through from the planning stage to the implementation stage before we give the planning dollars. Now, if we're able to come up with some dollars to help incent the implementation, that's not a bad idea either. But I think both of those need to work in tandem.
And I think that's a really good point. And let me just follow up for at least you two. One of the things that we do with the LTA program is try to work in communities that don't have a lot of resources, and that's even harder because we want to make sure that they're thinking about their future, they're planning for the problems they have today and tomorrow, and yet they don't have the staff resources, the other resources to pull those through. So again, I guess I'm looking for advice. I'll use this panel as a way to get advice. How do we think about it? Are we focused in the right way doing this? And if so, because I think we have to figure out how to help those communities, what do we need to do? How do we need to get them to that commitment of that next step?
Randy, that's a hugely important question. I'm really glad you asked it because the struggling communities, and they're not just the usual suspects anymore. There are communities struggling that we don't really know are struggling until there's the big public meeting and you find out there's something you expect that's not going to be there. But those communities are, if you just look at the basic arithmetic, the revenues are down, they're not getting transfer stamps, they're not getting water bills paid, all those sorts of things. And their leadership, like a lot of households in America, we don't know how to plan for the future. We don't know if our money's invested in the right retirement fund and all that sort of stuff. And when you begin to talk about investments like the kind we're talking about, infrastructure, roads, transit, developing smart home sites, you really do have to take the long view. And many communities are bombarded by those with the short view. I don't want to cast aspersions on developers, but there are a lot of builders and others who come in and say, we want to make this deal work here with you today, now. And it might not be the best thing for 10, 15 years. So it is really quite a testament to CMAP, to MPC, to others, Metropolis Strategies and others, who have kept the long view in front of people. not just the policymakers, not just those of us wonks who are in it every day, but the mom and Joe homemaker, the homeowners, the parents, the folks with kids in the schools, the employers, as we said earlier. It really is about working hard to stay out in front of those people. I like it when a CEO says to me, I heard this guy Randy Blankenhorn talking one day, and we got to start having a conversation with our staff about these things. Mary Sue is out in front of folks all the time. When you guys are out in front of people, it's a different, it has a different flavor, okay? And it breaks these issues down to where it's in front of people and they understand it and they take it into their village halls, they take it into their plan commissions, and that local engagement will drive the larger issues up. And so, Planning for Progress and the technical assistance grants that we've gotten from your office has helped us to take our message out and to open our ears, whereas we've now engaged somewhere around, 15 to 100 to 1,700 people in a conversation about what do you expect from the county? What is it that you feel you need? How do we work with your villages, towns, your school districts? Dare I touch that? And we're having a different conversation again, and it's because of how you guys are staying out in front of folks. And we have to continue to work together to drive that conversation.
So let's move to workforce and jobs. And Mayor, I think I'll start with you because we were having a nice conversation before this all started about my concerns. And I have real concerns that the workforce development system doesn't work very well today. It's a messy thing to get through. Someone, when we were doing the plan, showed me a chart of the funding streams and the programs, and I said, "Get that away from me. I can't even figure that out." And if I can't figure it out, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. But if I can't figure it out, a general worker is not going to figure out how to get into the right program, and a business isn't going to take the time to figure out how to get through that system. So how do we train for tomorrow's jobs in a better way?
There we go. In Aurora, our major concern over the last 20 years was really reducing crime and gangs. It was a huge problem for us. We've had tremendous success there, so then the question becomes, what now? And when you look at our student population, you look at our demographics, I think 8 out of 10 jobs require a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree. Those types of things are out there. But there's all kinds of jobs out there right now that are going unfilled. We have a Caterpillar plant right next door in Montgomery. There's CNC, they're sitting there with no one operating them because they can't find qualified people to do that. We have a number of students who don't intend to go to 4 years of college. What we've done is, number one, we've worked on early learning and put a program in place to encourage more early learning because we know that'll help. Aurora University is about to open a STEM academy where we're taking 3rd through 8th graders from 3 different school districts in Aurora, putting them in that academy for a STEM-oriented education. But more importantly, perhaps, is the teachers will come from those local districts, will work on a master's in STEM curriculum, et cetera, then go back and try to propagate STEM education within their own districts. But the third leg of that stool, and perhaps the most critical, is that we're right now working on a Pathways to Prosperity program, a workforce development program, in conjunction with Harvard. DCEO was involved in this. We did asset mapping, which was an arduous, lengthy process to determine the areas of employment that are most promising in the relatively near future. Identified those as IT, as healthcare, and as advanced manufacturing. And right now, with Waubonsee Community College heavily involved with our business and our school districts, and believe me, as mayor, dealing with academia and the business community and trying to get them working together, if I can solve that problem, I will probably run for president of the United States. But it's a very
we'll vote for you.
It's a very interesting process. I've learned a lot, and of course, you can see I lost my hair. But it does work over time if you stick with it, and you have people that are invested. And so we've already got individual districts working with dual credit courses, those kinds of things, so that we're getting there. Our next step will be to create an actual facility that will be intended to do skills training in that area. We'll incorporate 3 or 4 of the 6 districts that we have, school districts that we have in the city of Aurora. So I think it could be done. But I think all of us, I think almost every community or every region, really needs to start focusing heavily on this, because all the lawyers in the world, aren't going to make our country move forward. In fact, well, never mind. But anyway, I think that we need to do the proper training in the areas that'll make this country competitive. And it doesn't always mean a 4-year degree. It doesn't always even mean a 2-year degree. It means that we have to identify the areas that are critical, and we have to make sure that we're doing the training. And that's what we're trying to do. Invite me back in 3 years, and I'll tell you how we're doing.
Randy, I could say a lot about what has emerged from the consolidation, the merging, if you will, of the workforce efforts between the city of Chicago and Cook County. But as you know, there now is the workforce partnership, and it has done a great deal. I'll just start by saying we're saving $2 million annually, just in eliminating a lot of redundancy by bringing these two things together. So I think that's significant. But it's provided services now to about 140,000 residents. We've got 48 workforce agencies that we do grants with and work through, with business intermediaries. There are 10 workforce centers, 2 satellite centers, all of that. But consolidating this thing just on the county side from 3 entities into 1, and of course then merging with the city, it's a nonprofit, so it's attracting other dollars to do its work that are not taxpayer kind of dollars. So we've got a different platform, and one of the things we've been driving is a demand-driven system. And so right now, as a result of a survey that's been done with employers, we're sort of driving the conversation around 40 key occupations. And that's down from 700. So, those are employers saying, no, we don't need that. We don't even have that title anymore, to focusing on these 40. So that's one thing. The other is there's some really good news, obviously, that we've become directly engaged with Mariano's, and that was from the Dominic's closings and the servicings we did with those who were laid off. We've now facilitated 700 hires for Mariano's, and many of those are coming from the Dominic's layoffs. So huge kudos to that team led by Karen Norrington Reeves. But the other piece of this, again, I always try to take the practical approach. We provide tax incentives for a number of business and industrial interests across Cook County. It is a very engaging, difficult process for our staff. They put a lot of hard work and time into it. But one of the things we realize is our tax incentives are not TIF. And so they don't come with job requirements and those sorts of things. They try to make the case to us about jobs. And so when we bring those forward to our Board of Commissioners, we say there are X number of jobs being retained, there are X number of jobs purportedly to be created, and then we break down construction, permanent, all of that. So, but one of the things I said was, rather than us drive a hammer and say, you have to provide these jobs, you have to do this, we said, let's be more collaborative. And so we've developed essentially a two-way communication mechanism. So we've said, if you want to apply for this tax incentive, you have to engage through the workforce partnership. Tell us, what are the jobs that you're seeking? What are the jobs that you expect to grow as a result of this investment or tax savings? We then are trying to track that and move through it year to year with those who have received a tax incentive. So again, we're trying to work with them. We're saying, hey, if you say you're going to need 50 machinists or tool handlers or whatever it is, we try to direct them. And we're engaging the community colleges. We're engaging a number of those who are doing that sort of training. And so, again, just another practical approach. And we're hoping that it will continue to bear fruit.
Let me follow up just for a second. Yesterday, Secretary Pritzker announced that Cook County got a manufacturing community grant. Congratulations, first of all, and to all of your partners, which I think we are one of. How does this new grant, is there a place for workforce development in this new grant? I don't actually know personally very much about it.
Absolutely. Well, you've caught me in the middle of my touchdown dance. I'm really, really thrilled to announce that we are one of 12 recipients for this designation. There were 70 applicants, I believe. So the staff worked extraordinarily hard. This is something we've done in collaboration with the other counties, if you will. So we've got DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Lake, McHenry, and Will and the city at the table with us. We made a joint application. So again, trying to show this as an example of regional collaboration here. Randy has driven us to speak the right language. And yes, we were successful as of yesterday afternoon. And the Chicago Metro Metal Consortium, as it's called, it will be now eligible for, over a period of time, up to $1.3 billion in capital to assist with the metal fabrication industry here in this region, of which there are 3,700 employers or firms involved in this work, and they already employ 100,000 folks in this region. So we're kind of a focal point for this work. We expect to go after grants and opportunities through 3 of the 9 federal departments. So they include the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, and HUD. And the workforce and the training and the technology components all embedded in that is sort of how we expect to drive that. So we are thrilled. I was also glad that folks didn't throw the leftover lunch because they were expecting the tall lady with sensible shoes.
Oh, there we go. It's a delay. While transit doesn't specifically get in the space of developing human capital specifically, we do play a role in this issue in terms of actually connecting people to jobs. And just to sort of highlight that we have gotten ourselves eligible to be able to receive a pretty significant amount of federal money for this region that actually is now focused on sort of, again, leveraging federal money to provide access to jobs. So direct specific things and funding sort of some of PACE's Vanpool programs and some of their subscription-based services, but then going beyond that and actually working with the counties around the region to subsidize and support some of their more locally based paratransit type services and on-demand and on-call services. Taking it beyond that and focusing much more on developing partnerships with the business community and sort of these last mile shuttle bug connections in the suburbs, especially where we've identified that there are job opportunities, job markets. You know, we've got a great basic traditional transit infrastructure, but sometimes you can't get to that urban campus up in Lake Cook or out in Oak Brook area. You know, again, it's sort of that but-for question, that last couple of miles. And so we're actually doing a very data-driven analysis with a series of businesses and local communities to actually provide those next tier of services around the region to, again, leverage off the existing infrastructure we have, but provide more focused efforts so we are trying to keep up and serve demand and the demand and the supply out there without necessarily relying on these major federal new infrastructure projects.
So let's move on to efficient governance, which is hard for me when we lead the world in the number of governments. We simply have too many. Let's be honest about that. But it's hard. And I want to talk about the idea of coordination and up to consolidation. We always think that, well, we have too many, let's consolidate governments. And that's not always the right answer. And I don't want to get into the RTA thing together, but there's a lot of, but it's happening with fire districts. It's happening between communities and providing shared services. The things that the city and the county are doing together, as well as the county and some of its suburbs. Talk about some success things. Talk about how we can show some success in really providing services more efficiently, even if we can't take that hard step of consolidating government.
Well, I think when we talk about the multitude of governmental levels or whatever, I automatically think of township government as being somewhat redundant. However, in terms of being able to do real damage, of late I've been more concerned about the General Assembly than the township. But what we've done, I think one of the ways to become more efficient is to collaborate. Collaboration is a hugely, it's an overused term. But I'll tell you, we engaged in trying to purchase a public safety, police, fire radio system, and we were able to work with Naperville. We're a city of 200,000. They're a city of about 150 or a little less. So we took our combined buying power, and we were able to save a huge amount of dollars by working together. We then went on to go apply for a FEMA grant for public safety training, televised type training or whatever, and got an $800,000 grant there as well. So working collaboratively can make a huge difference. And the other thing I'll say right now is if a community is working for or trying to get a grant, working on a grant, one of the best ways to leverage that grant is to be collaborating with other communities. And I think that's very smart of the agencies that issue the grants, that they look upon that as a very positive aspect of the project. And it is. So I think the other thing that so there are, I think, positive stories. One of the concerns I have as a mayor is the multitude of agencies, sometimes even the same agency, making demands on communities, the left hand not knowing what the right is doing. And it's almost as if, we've got long-term stormwater control plan, federal government, knocked on the door in the midst of the recession and said, well, we've got a $120 million project for you, Aurora, and we had to deal with that. But at the same time, we get a knock on the door from the IEPA that's looking at changing stormwater retention, detention requirements, et cetera. Another multi-million-dollar. Those things are all, it would be nice if government would consider what other governmental units are doing at the same time, or even if the state would just know what another department of the state was asking for at the same time. But also, when you're looking at communities like Aurora, as I say, not a wealthy community, if they're in the midst of a recession, would it make sense perhaps to hold off a little while before making those demands? But I do think that collaboration is one way to get around the problem.
Let me ask you to take it in a different way, because I know that water is such an important issue to you. And you've been so instrumental in the Northwest Water Alliance. Tell us about how that came together and what you're really trying to do, because this is a multi-county, multi-municipality effort. Do you think it's working, and what made it go? What made it take that really first step?
Well, I represented, I think it was Kane Kendall in the regional water supply planning process a couple of years back, along with an engineer. And it worked out very well. But we sat through, 2 years or more of that process, and it came to a conclusion. And my thought was, okay, now what? And the concern I had was basically that ultimately it would just be assigned on high to some state agency who had very little on-the-ground knowledge of what our area was like, what our issues were, et cetera. So we created, with the cooperation of 80 communities in 5 counties, the Northwest Water Planning Alliance. And frankly, you want to talk about examples of collaboration and help from LTA, from MPC, both of your agencies were phenomenal and have been and continue to be in terms of helping us move our program along. What have we done? We've accomplished a model water conservation ordinance for communities that is slowly being adopted, but it's being adopted. And we had help in identifying what the circumstances were throughout our area. But the other thing we've done is developed a water reporting form. All of our communities in that area had all kinds of different ways of reporting what, their usage, their this, their that, or whatever. And so there was no common language. So we created this common language in this form that now the Illinois Water Survey Group itself, Illinois State Water Survey, I think it is, they will accept at the end of the year as the preeminent report so they can gauge what's going on within our area. And so we've had, I think, some accomplishments. We have a lot more to do, but I think what we've done is try to take our fate into our own hands as it relates to water supply in that area. And again, I cannot say thank you enough to both MPC and CMAP in terms of supporting that effort.
Yeah, Randy, I guess I mentioned at length about what the consolidation of the workforce efforts and what that represents in terms of savings and efficiency and being more directive. But we've also taken some other steps. We do have a home consortium that's expanding at the county, and so it's a different way to deal with HUD and the municipalities and the county being more of an intermediary now and driving some efficiencies and hopefully some better deals. We're expanding that now to include block grant, so there's a new consortium emerging there. But one thing we've done is we created a job order contracting system for the county that in some ways mirrored what already existed at the city. And these are pre-approved pools of contractors, architects, engineers, various talents. And we needed that simply because for our own internal purposes, Cook County has 19 million square feet of property. We got courthouses, hospitals, office buildings, clinics, you name it, the jail. So we needed to not have every single thing go through the arduous, bid application procurement process. So pre-approved pools. Well, my staff got creative and said, these struggling communities, they're not getting their public works projects done. They're not getting their road projects done. They don't know how to get sewer deals and inspections completed. And so we've expanded, sort of in a trial run, our JOC program, and we're offering it out to some of these struggling communities. Many of them, as you know, they've laid off all but essential staff. They've shut down police stations, fire stations. That's another story. But they've laid off engineers. And so we said, here's a way for us to expand a good idea as a service to these communities. But I think going further, and we've done some similar things with GIS, working with the South Suburban mayors and managers. I am not smart enough to talk about how good a process that has become. And then internally, of course, just my bureau before this president, they were a bunch of different departments all across the county. They were brought together under one umbrella. There are now 5, planning and development, capital planning, real estate, building and zoning, board of zoning appeals. Workforce was in there. Now they're a dotted line. And so we've sort of exported a number of things to drive efficiencies. I think the biggest challenge is what we've yet to see an example of, and that is, again, the local school districts. I beat this drum all the time. People, when they hear me start, they start running for the rafters. They want to get out of the room. But I worked at the local level. I worked in city government, Richmond, Virginia. I worked in Village of Park Forest for a number of years before going to LISC and all that other stuff. But the school district situation here for the K through 8 is an extraordinary example of way too much government and bureaucracy. These districts are small. They don't adhere to municipal boundaries, so a lot of people don't understand that, you might not like this community next door to you, but you know what? Your kid's already in school with those kids. There are too many of them. If you don't have enough car dealerships and shopping malls and industrial players in your community, you're taxed through the nose. So we're hoping to work with a number of entities to pilot an effort that may make the case for what needs to occur. Because currently as it stands, this structure, with all these, we got 1 million different local school districts. Again, K through 8, not talking about the high school districts. They're individual taxing bodies. It's the biggest thing on your tax bill if you live in the suburbs. And I'm looking at one district. There's a business in that district that pays $800,000 a year property taxes to that local school district. That local school district has 2 schools. It has 378 children. It has a 10-to-1 student-teacher ratio. That's very good, 10-to-1. They have the 3rd lowest scores in the state. Okay, is that business going to expand? They're fully capable of expanding. They are a global entity. They're not going to do nothing, man. I got 2 other global players in that same school district, and they are surrounded by 150 acres of developable land. I know there could be 1,500 to 2,000 jobs there, but this local school district strategy is what's killing it. So, on my soapbox, not everybody left the room, but you said, what are some examples? It's got to happen. It's just got to happen.
I give you a lot of credit. It's a tough thing to talk about, but if we don't start talking about fixing that, Leanne, quickly on the transit side, where are we in all of this conversation?
Well, we don't have time to tackle the big elephant in the room, which you sort of alluded to at the beginning. But I mean, I guess I'll just say two quick things. The RTA in and of itself and the transit system governance is a creature of the state legislature. So much of what we do, contrary to maybe popular opinion or some media headlines, some of the things we don't do just because we want to. It's because we're required by state statute to do certain things. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking at ways to create efficiencies, do things better. And I think we are trying to move the ball. This is one of my personal goals in my new capacity at RTA, is to sort of advance some of these issues. We're doing what we can within the limits and the statutes that we have. So, creating some of these efficiencies, leading on sort of developing this system-wide asset inventory. Transit's got a lot of catch-up to do in the world of just categorizing assets in our inventory to determine what our needs are before we can even begin to look at asset allocation and things like that. So we've taken on that and really worked very collaboratively with service boards to move that. But that takes time and effort, and that's one of the things I think we've really moving the ball forward on. Performance measures, we've done a lot of work on that over the last 4 or 5 years. Are we there yet? No. Have we got to go further? Absolutely. But we should, we're plodding away at some of these things that can help sort of move us forward within the existing governance. But if, Springfield wants to engage in a conversation of looking at the governance of Illinois, of transit in northeastern Illinois, we would actively engage in that discussion. And but as it stands right now, RTA is the only agency that holistically looks at the transit system across our region, and our job is to balance a lot of those competing issues and resources. And while it sometimes plays out like, oh, there's dysfunction and we don't work, I would pose a sort of slightly different argument to some of it. We have a $4.5 billion budget on an annual basis. We argue about $3 to $6 million annually. I would argue that's a pretty healthy and maybe a very good debate our region should be having. The rest is pretty much we work through and we negotiate and we agree upon. In the end, we end up fighting over crumbs, back to the original point about not enough money. But, my personal goal is to sort of advance, build those bridges, keep those relationships, and advance some of these things within the construct that we have.
Okay. Well, so now we're turning over to the audience participation portion of our program. We will have a roving microphone. I ask that you wait for the microphone to come to you, state your name, and ask a brief question. We'll try to get as many folks in as we can. I'm going to kick us off with the first question to the panel. And now Randy is fair game as well. He's no longer moderator, so feel free to launch some questions at him. So here's the first question to the group. In the transportation realm, CMAP has done a good job and a long-standing job, even through CATS, its predecessor, of sort of engaging in a regional conversation about spending transportation resources. There are many other resources that come to this region, from state revolving loan funds for waste and water treatment facilities and water supply. There are CDBG dollars. There are home dollars. Is there a role to have a better regional conversation in regards to allocation of those resources, and what would be CMAP's role in that?
Well, I don't think I should start. I think I should react. Because I think Peter knows what I might say.
Maybe they don't. I don't.
Sure. I think some of what you're suggesting actually has begun. There are so many important committees that are housed or they meet at CMAP, and we have a lot of staff and key staff who are participants in those committees, whether it be housing, economic development, transportation, and the like. But one of those that has a quarterly meeting that Randy oversees is the county presidents. And the grant that I mentioned earlier, that conversation grew out of a meeting that occurred there and with that group. And it is fairly extraordinary to see all these county presidents, including my boss, sitting in that room, talking very seriously, but in a very good way, in a very healthy way with each other about some of these challenges. And some of that comes down to how do we do things together and how do we make it more efficient? And so some of that, for me, has bled down from my boss saying, I want this to be better. I want us to have a better response to this issue. And, Randy gets to see a lot of, and his staff, a lot of our decision making. There are CMAP participants on our Community Development Advisory Committee that allocates block grant dollars on an annual basis. And so we are developing better filters for not only grant funds, but also the ways in which we engage with municipalities for services, for loans, all sorts of things. We're developing better filters by working through some of the work with CMAP.
Well, let me just throw it out there from my perspective, and that is that most of the issues that CMAP deals with are regional in nature. Whether it's the economy, whether it's natural resources, whether it's transportation, whether it's other infrastructure from broadband to water and sewer, these issues don't stop at municipal and county lines. And I think that one of the reasons we were created was to think about these things at that regional level. That doesn't mean that, I don't think that means necessarily that CMAP has to have a committee that allocates funds, like we do for transportation. Could it? Sure. Would it be more efficient? I don't know. We'd have to see. But mostly it's, I think, what you were talking about, and that is that how do we think about this decision-making inside of that regional context? How do the decisions that I'm making on water affect my neighbor? How does it affect our ability to attract business and to create jobs? That's where we come from as CMAP, is what is that regional perspective that honestly drives most of the major issues that we face as a metropolitan area.
I have the distinct pleasure of sitting also on several CMAP boards, committees, and the MPO policy committee, which is more just focused on the transportation side. We touched on this. I think you were getting to this a little earlier too. CMAP is the only agency in the region that truly has not just a regional perspective, but a multifaceted regional perspective. I wear a regional perspective, but just on the transit side, and force myself into other broader transportation conversations and other CMAP conversations just because I'm a planning geek, I guess, policy geek. But I think you are uniquely positioned to actually sort of engage that dialogue. We were sort of talking around it a little bit earlier, but to facilitate those broader policy conversations that we get mired in, and sometimes because we're implementing a program or a grant or an activity around it. But you guys can sort of sit there and sort of position these broader policy issues, educate different walks of life in a sense. So you're not just dealing with mayors, you're not just dealing with community advocates. You can talk to a range. You have that broader audience, and I think that that's an opportunity that CMAP really can leverage, and that's, I think, the value of the plan too in this region, to help sort of some of the wonkier or more specific stuff that some of us get mired in from our different perspectives, to sort of bring that holistically together, I think is really important.
Caitlin, we have a first question here in the second row.
I'm Dick Gill with the Southeast Chicago Commission. I've heard some rather disappointing things from the panel about the private sector and the business community. I'd like to ask the panel, why do you think they're not more engaged in exercising more leadership in planning and getting revenue for the region? And one specific thing, based on what I've heard, it sounds like job training is being left up to the public sector. And are they not trying to train people for their business?
A couple of questions there. One, I'll say the private sector is doing a lot of direct training of people. And in fact, they are expending dollars of their private capital to do training, like the rail industry, for example. Many of the big five rail companies here expend a lot of capital of their own, training people for very, very good jobs that perhaps would be more widely known, understood, and there'd be more resources for them if they were working more directly with the community colleges, for example. A number of them have rail logistics programs where instead of this firm spending, $6 million training people, they could be working with the college network here to really advance what they're already doing and pull really qualified people from there. So the private sector is doing a lot of training. What the workforce folks are trying to do is to do more linking of both training programs and employers. On the business side, I know that there are a lot of civic leaders, corporate leaders have been involved in a lot of very traditional frames to engage issues in the region. For President Preckwinkle, she has a Council of Economic Advisors led by John Rogers and Bill Osborne, the retired chair of Northern Trust. And that group of 20-something corporate folks is advising us in a very, very acute way around some of the issues that we're bringing forward. We've thrown some things on the wall when they're in the room, and we get a lot of very stern opinions about the direction we're going. So I know that we're engaging them. I know the mayor's got World Business Chicago, a lot of the same folks. So I think at the highest levels, we do have corporate folks engaged in the conversation, but we've got to push it even more. It's got to come outside of a traditional frame.
I think King Harris maybe was responding, or
Yeah. Well, and let me say this while King gets a microphone. You know, to say that the private sector isn't engaged in these conversations is simply not the case. As I travel around the country and talk to major metro area directors like us, all I hear is, how do I get business engaged like you guys have? I think what we're saying is we need more. Not that there's not an engagement. We have really pretty significant engagement of the private sector in the important policy issues that this region faces. We know, though, that many of these issues aren't going to happen because government or a CMAP says it. It's going to be the private sector is going to convince legislative leaders and political leaders that this is how we have to move it forward.
I just wanted to say amen.
Thanks, Dan.
The private sector does plenty. If you've ever run a business, the things we're talking about come numbers 414 to 415 on our list of things that we worry about every day. We're trying to survive. We're in a world market, guys. And some of the people that you've got on your advisors, who I know, are great, but a lot of them are retired. And they're not sitting there day to day fighting these battles. Businesses, I'm telling you about Mayor Wisner. We ran for a while the largest business in Aurora, and we worked actively with Aurora University. We sent lots of people that we paid for. And Aurora University was very helpful, by the way. I'm very heartened that the city colleges are finally, under Paula Wolf's leadership, finally getting their programs set up so they really can help business. But I like to tell people one story that's worth thinking about. So here's a business in Cary, Illinois that had to hire 20 skilled people or semi-skilled people for good paying factory jobs. We interviewed 240 people. We couldn't fill the jobs. If I'm a business leader and I do have some free time, which most of them don't, I'm going to worry about education first, just general education.
Rick, along the pillar. Mr. Mann will get you in a moment, and I got two over on this left
Could
side.
I just
Please,
give
please.
a brief
You don't have to wait. You
response?
guys can just talk.
I was joking before about the fact that the business community and the academic community are really two different cultures. When we talk about bringing the business community into the conversation, the business community wants a meaningful conversation. They don't want to be at the table forever talking about what could be. They want to move forward quickly. So I think one of the benefits that we had in Aurora is we have multiple school districts, not a unit district. And who's to say whether those two parties would ever get together under other circumstances? But because the city got involved and called both folks to the table and said this has to be a priority for the community, and because we're working very hard on making sure that the business community it doesn't have to go to endless meetings to get to where we need to be. It's working out so far. But they are very much two different cultures. The business community doesn't have, number one, as King has said, basically, they're going 9 different directions on any given day. But you have to be able to address their needs and meet them in a duly short process to some degree. And if you prove that you're willing to do what you say you're going to do, they'll stay involved. If they think they're wasting their time, that'll be the end of it. So.
One really very basic thing, that, again, it's another one of my soapboxes that may cause people to run for the door, but education has a huge impact on corporate relocation decisions. And when we read about them and hear about them and hear them debated, they're talking about cost and land and sites and whether this is a big, pretty building, whatever. Companies all over the globe look at Chicago and they say we have, top flight universities. We graduate some of the sharpest kids on the planet. But that's going to be, 75 jobs that a firm has out of maybe 4,500. And that other 3,000 or 4,000, they're looking at your standardized scores, and they're saying, are these folks, do they read and write? Can they add and subtract? Can they do some of the basic tasks that we're going to need 75, 80% of our employees to do? They don't want to be in that situation in Cary where you're like, oh man, I got to import a clerical person from 150 miles away. So again, corporate site decisions, a lot of that plays into education, statistics, and data, and how we invest in education and whether or not we have a prepared workforce. It starts all the way down and all the way up.
Thank you, Herman. Rick?
Back to the transportation.
I know who you are, but everybody else doesn't.
I'm sorry, Rick Harnish. I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest High-Speed Rail Association. Leanne, you talked about the problem with the last mile in using the train to get to suburban jobs. Frequently, there's a problem with the middle mile. Metra has 5 terminals in and around downtown. 2 of them are on one side of the loop and the other 3 on the other side of the loop. So if you want to get from Harvey to Schaumburg on Metra or from U of C to O'Hare on Metra, you're looking at a mile walk between the 2 stations. Has any work been done in the GO 2040 revision about how to deal with that misconnection in the middle of the city?
Well, we're not going to physically pick up and move train stations. So, I mean, that's one of the challenges of a spoken hub system that this region has, too. And we don't have one hub, we have multiple hubs. I mean, we actually are working on interagency signage program across the region. So it's wayfinding, information signage around the entire region at key multimodal locations. That's one piece. But I'm not sure that even sort of realistically thinking about a 2 lengthy Metra line trip is a viable option for someone commuting to a job. One of the things we've been focusing and working with, and PACE is doing a lot of the implementation of this, is sort of through some of these federal funds that I mentioned earlier, is accessing express bus routes and more of a subscription-based or sort of where there's connecting jobs and housing, employment base with south suburbs, in some cases up to the O'Hare, Elk Grove area is one of those market examples. So that might be a more viable opportunity than it's a one-seat ride. Anyone who's looked at transit data and understands transit markets, the more seats you put on a ride in terms of how many times you have to change, your ridership drops off, your time, your missed connections, all those things. So we're trying to look creatively about how to serve those markets and not just looking at the traditional fixed rail services.
Boy,
Yes.
I like science fiction. So, we tore up Wacker Drive twice. I always said, oh, hell, while it's torn up, why don't we just make it into fixed rail? No one needs to drive in Lower Wacker other than trains and buses and rail. I think link the stations that way. But, that's just me.
There must be a way to create a stronger network than a few subscription buses that allows people to travel by Metra and CTA in a much more connected way across the region, as opposed to just into and out of the city. And dealing with the links and how to create a through Metra service, I think, is one of the critical pieces of making that very robust network happen.
So I'm going to ask, anybody wants to make another quick comment? We've got about 4 minutes and 3 questions. So if we have short questions and short answers, we can get to all of them. Did you want to comment, Leanne?
I mean, yeah, in a perfect world, that would all be wonderful, but a lot of this comes down to money and sort of chipping away at what we can do now. I love the vision of a unified, urban downtown central terminus. I mean, if anyone's been to Berlin, Peter, I know you were there with me, actually. And, it's this 5-tiered station, you've got inner city, you've got local, it's like, yes, could we do that? Well, they had kind of a no man's land that they had a bunch of open space they could build it on. And they wanted to make the physical investment in the infrastructure to accomplish it. There's a lot of other big policy choices that a region and sort of trying to connect back to the broader conversation about some of these and the interconnectiveness of those issues. So it's not just about transit, because sometimes we, as I said earlier, sound self-serving, sort of asking for money to create this, implement a vision like this. You know, it's helping people understand why you want to build a multimodal urban center versus, you know, and because it's about jobs, it's about, and it builds off education, it's about livable communities, it's about the economy. It's all those things and making that point. Sorry.
Question on the end.
I have a sustainability question. I'm Marty Jablonski with Landmark Partners, and this is for Leanne. With the increased demand or pushing for usage of bicycles, is the RTA involved much with that, as it particularly maybe connects or concerns trying to create more nexus trails? And how much impact really is that having on RTA or transportation in general? Is there really that much of a dent bicycle riding is going to make?
Well, I personally look at the transportation network as a you know, layering of all these things play in. Is one going to change the world? No. I mean, one of the things transit did a while back was, you know, work to allow bikes on transit, and that's, you know, again, some of those connectivity pieces. You know, at the end, you get off a metro line, I can access a trail, I can access a job, you know, and that's an option. So that was one thing that transit did a little while ago. You know, the divvy connections in the city are wonderful. I mean, I think the Tribune just did this story a week or so ago. I should ask Rich to respond. But you know, some of the busiest station locations were in and around our transportation metro hubs in the downtown area. So I mean, there's proof in the pudding that bikes can serve a need, and Divvy, you know, has had to sort of respond to it and really keep that supply of bikes going. And you see, I don't know, anyone who's around, you just see all sorts of walks of life. You know, you're not just sort of seeing the bike messenger looking guy out there on the divvy bike. You know, I'm seeing women in heels and skirts, and so it's sort of it's a wonderful thing. And I think these things just grow, and as more people see it, these things start to actually have an impact. No, that's not a silver bullet, but I think it's you know, many tools in the toolbox. I think I know that sounds cliched, but I think it's important.
Yes, in the back.
Wanted to build on Randy's question. This is Gary Kinnean from 7 Generations Ahead about how to implement Go to 2040, and the example that Mayor Wisner used about the regional water supply planning process. What are the other opportunities within Go to 2040 to take sort of a shared services and collaborative implementation model to the other strategies in the plan? Well,
I don't know that there's much that doesn't have that model, to be perfectly frank. That's the way we look at the world, that it's a collaborative region, that these issues cross borders, they cross lines, and not only inside of the policy issue, but how they connect to the other policy issues that are there. Livability is about a whole bunch of things. And so I think that, for example, in the local technical assistance program, you're probably going to get significantly higher priority if this is a collaborative effort with your neighbors. And if you bring in not-for-profit groups, and if you bring in residents in a different way. And so we really think, Gary, that the short answer is that's what the plan is. That's really what it's meant to do, is to bring communities and people together across, no offense to the mayor, what are artificial municipal and county boundaries. I like to say that people live regional lives, and we need to think that way.
So I'm going to get yelled at by my friend Suzanne and my board member, Mr. Mann, but we are out of time. So that's going to have to be the final word. I want to, before we thank our panelists, just ask you for a couple of things. One, you do have a survey on your chair, and we greatly appreciate your comments and feedback after any event. We use all that to help fine-tune our future events. Speaking of which, you also hopefully picked up a flyer outside. We have an event with Deborah Rutter from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. We like to joke in the office, CSO doesn't just mean combined sewer overflows, ha ha ha. So please, I even got Rich laughing on that. So please pick that up and join us for that. And then I'd like to sincerely thank our panelists today, and Herman particularly for pinch hitting for the president, did a wonderful job. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. We're adjourned.